All right. So yeah, I just thought, as we're talking about this
Yeah.
idea of believing into the sovereignty of God in salvation,
Yeah.
and yet believing in our responsibility to proclaim the gospel, what place is there for stuff like door-to-door evangelism, something that seems so unnatural? And
Yeah.
I thought it'd be good for me to hear from you,
Yeah.
but the reason I want to record this is because I think there's other people who would benefit from it as well in my own church and
Yeah.
maybe beyond.
Yeah, absolutely, bro. So I'll give you kind of a 30,000 foot view, Sam, and then I'll kind of get into the weeds. The first thing I always tell people is the Jehovah Witnesses do it, and they are exploding, and they are insanely bold when they do it. When we moved to Toronto, Canada, I thought like, oh, finally we'll get away from the Jehovah Witnesses. Nope, they're up there too, man, and they're knocking on doors, and they're doing it. So I would say this: when we first moved to Canada, I was talking to a guy, and he asked me. He said, we parachuted in with just our family. We didn't have a core team, and I would never recommend planners doing that today, unless it was what they had to do, and that's what we had to do. We tried to build a core team, but it's tough to convince people to move from Memphis to Canada, and so we got to Canada. I was talking to a pastor, and he said, "Well, I think he was from, I don't remember where he's from, but he said, how are you guys going to start this church?" And I said, "Well, we're going to knock on doors, tell people about Jesus, share the gospel, and all those things." And he was like, "Man, you can't do that in a place like Canada." And I said, "Well, why not?" And he said, "Well, it won't work." And I said, "We'll see. I don't know any other way to do it." And here's what people have to understand from the beginning when you talk about door-to-door evangelism, surveying. I'll get into that in just a minute. Is that we are not expecting or looking for the masses. We're looking for the people that the Holy Spirit is drawing to the Father. And so that's a really key principle. We're looking for the low-hanging fruit. And most importantly, we're looking for the person of peace. Right? It's in the scripture. We're looking for that household who has a soft heart, who the Spirit has gone before us. Theologically, we believe that the Spirit has gone before us, preparing people. It's a promise that God says that the harvest is plentiful, right? But the laborers are few. And so we are taking the Lord at that promise, and we are going into the harvest, and it's an intentional way to reach people. When you talk about evangelism, relationship evangelism has blown up. If anybody's doing evangelism, it's typically through relationships, right? School, work. I go into this restaurant all the time. I know the server. I'm building that relationship. What I always tell people when we have these conversations is people say, well, is it relational evangelism or cold evangelism, like cold call evangelism, knocking on doors, sharing the gospel with your mechanic, whatever? And I always say, yes, it's all of the above. Do it all. Do it all. We should always be sharing the gospel. But I think what we've done, Sam, is that we as relationship evangelism has been pushed and elevating all those kinds of things, the other side has diminished. And what we've said is, well, that doesn't work anymore. So really what we need to do is relationship or whatever it may be. And the reality of it is we need to do all of it. And so when we got to Canada, man, I met a guy who his name's John Wooster, and he was essentially my coach for a little bit in church planning. And John and I are different in a lot of ways, have different ideas on a lot of different things. But he taught me about surveying, and surveying your community was like eye-opening to me, because for every church planner, when we come into a context, we need to understand and learn about our context. And so John introduced this idea of going door-to-door surveying. He'd been doing it for years. And I was already doing door-to-door evangelism. And I thought, this is perfect, man. And so we started doing that pretty early on in Toronto when we arrived.
So you
And
you switched to more of a surveying approach.
so we would use the surveying It wasn't disingenuous. We would use the survey to actually learn because we were trying to learn the context and the culture. As soon as I opened my mouth up there, people knew I wasn't Canadian. So it was an easy in. I would knock on the door, I would introduce myself, I'd say, hi, my name's Matt Hess. As you can tell by the sound of my voice, I'm American, and my family and I has moved here, and we're trying to learn about the culture. And I was wondering if you had some time to answer, 4 to 6 questions for me today. And you get everything from a door slamming in your face to sure, to come back later, to all of the above.
Mhm.
One principle that when I teach planners this especially, you have to have thick skin, man. People don't go door to door because we're too sensitive. We don't like people. Nobody likes people saying, I don't want to talk, or or slamming the door in your face, or yeah, I could tell you story after story after story of things that has happened. But we have that survey, and we have those questions, and ultimately the last question is, what do you think of when you hear the name Jesus? And man, I'll never forget. One time there's about a 14-year-old, 15-year-old. We were starting a new church. It was the fourth church in the network that got started through us, and we were surveying that community. So we use that language. We're going to survey a community. We're going to survey Ellsbury, right? We're going to survey Louisiana, wherever it may be, and we track it all. Right. My wife is great at this. So like she's got a system with maps and all that. I'm not that guy. I'm don't leave me up in charge of that. And so I asked this young man, I said, it was summertime. He's out of school. I said, what do you think about when you hear the name Jesus? And he said, well, I've never heard that name before. I said, you never heard the name Jesus Christ? And he said, no. And eventually he says, you mean the swear word? And I said, well, unfortunately, people do use his name as a swear word, and I got a chance to share the gospel with them, right? And so that's the survey where we have a set number of questions and we ask, I can get you that later. And we ask those questions. But I always encourage pastors and planners, you need to write your own survey. Like you have a pulse, or you should have a pulse on your context and your community better than I would. And so you come up, don't do 20, don't do 10, do max should be 5 to 6. But you ask those questions. So that's the first way in which we go door to door. The second way that we go door to door is we'll knock on the door. Let's say you and me are in Ellsbury. I say, hey, my name's Matt. This is my friend Sam. And we're just out in our community today, and we're asking our neighbors if there's any way we can pray for them. Do you have any way that we can pray for you today? We start with prayer. And you would be amazed at how many people are open to prayer. I mean, we're in one of the most secular post-Christian contexts on the continent right now in Toronto, Canada. And many people would still ask and receive prayer. And once you get a chance to go before the Lord with them in prayer right there at their doorstep, man, then then you got to open door, essentially to begin to share the gospel and be in conversation with people and all those kinds of things. And so we did that on a regular, consistent basis. We're going to be doing it in Wentzville this summer. We're going to be surveying Wentzville and sharing the gospel, and we already got that on our timeline and all those kinds of things. And so we would do that on a pretty regular basis. And Canada was rough because of the weather. You don't want to do this in the wintertime.
Yeah.
But that's kind of like theologically, we have to take God at his word. And people say, well, how much fruit do you actually see from this? That's the question. Like, is this the best use of my time? Well, it's always the best use of our time to obey. Statistics tell us that 98% of Christians in North America do not share their faith on a regular basis. And so people will say, I was doing a conference once, and this guy came up to me afterwards, and he said, Pastor, I don't know if I believe that. And I said, well, can I ask you a question? And he said, sure. And I said, who did you share your faith with this week? And he's like, oh, well, I didn't get around to it. And I said, well, what about last week? And he said, I didn't. And I said, did you share your faith with anybody last month? And he kind of got quiet, and I just said, bro, I'm not doing that to try to embarrass you. It was just me and him. And I said, I'm not trying to do that to be harsh. I'm just saying, I think we share the gospel a lot more than we actually share the gospel.
Mhm.
And so it comes back to an obedient thing. Evangelism is one of my stronger gifts. And so I get that. We're not trying to change people's gift sets. We're just trying to help people obey. And man, I could tell you some incredible stories
So
about door to door.
Matt, when you go to door different communities, you've got survey method, you've got the prayer request method. Obviously, in each of these, you're looking for an openness,
Yeah.
an open, not just a literal open door, but spiritual open door
Yes. Yeah.
to be able to talk more about Jesus. But just to be clear, you're not talking about knocking on the door and saying, "Hey, I'm Matt from Waypoint Church, and I wanted if I could share the gospel with you today." You're not necessarily saying like just be that blunt about it.
Yeah. I don't start that way.
Okay.
Now, Sam, you brought up a great point. In all that we do as Christ followers, the most important thing is having a sensitivity to the Holy Spirit's leadership, right? And so, John 15:5, Jesus says, I am the vine, you're the branches, right? He who abides in me can bear much fruit. And so, that abiding piece is being spirit led, right? Jesus tells his disciples, it's better that I go away so the comforter can come, the helper can come. And the helper comes so we can be on mission. And so we have to teach our people to have a sensitivity when we're doing this. And we regularly gave our people evangelism training on a pretty fairly regular basis. There's an organization called No Place Left. I don't know if you've heard of them or not,
I don't think so.
but it's called noplaceleft.net. And I don't know if you've ever heard of the four fields principles and all those things. But if you go to noplaceleft.net, you can see a lot of the thinking on this and the tools that we do on this. I'm actually about to do a training video for our we have something called WOI, Waypoint Leadership Institute, and we have residents in that, and they have to complete this evangelism training in order to graduate. We want them to understand the harvest. And so it's called the 411 information every Christian needs to know to be on mission. And what we do essentially is we ask 4 questions on one sheet of paper in 1 hour. So we take that piece of paper, 8.5 by 11, we fold it in half, and we teach them, we answer 4 questions. Why do we need to share the gospel? Who do we need to share it with? What do we share when we have that? We give them 2 tools. We give them something called a 15-second testimony. And then, of course, the 3 circles tool that Jimmy Scroggins created. That's really popular. And then the win. You have to calendar it. If you don't, I think that's the biggest thing. If you don't put it on your calendar, if you don't, for evangelists, I walk into a Walmart and my mind instantly thinks there's 2 groups of people in here, lost people and saved people. And I begin to instantly think about who can I share the gospel with in this Walmart. But not everybody thinks that way, because they're not evangelists at heart. And so I think for most Christians, it has to be something that we are reminded of and that we're doing together, linking arms together, and we have to keep equipping people to do.
Let's talk just a little bit about logistics. So
Yeah.
in doing surveying, taking prayer requests, you had mentioned earlier, well, you don't want to do it in winter in Canada.
Yeah.
So there's obviously some logistics as far as what is more or less helpful.
Yeah.
What have you, and it may vary depending on the community, but what
Yeah.
have you found as far as weekday, weeknight, daytime, evening, week versus weekend? Like what have you found? Hey, this is probably the best time to do it.
Yeah, that's a great question, man. Saturday mornings are really good typically. like a 10 a.m. to noon can be a really good time. We Toronto is different. It's so big. People work all kinds of different hours and schedules and stuff like that. So we would go out in the afternoons and weekdays as well, like 2 o'clock or something like that, because people work in different shifts. But we typically found Saturday mornings was a pretty good time. So we may have like an evangelism training event on like a Saturday morning. We'd start at 8 o'clock, for example, and then we would go out after we train them. So we would train them in the 411 through no place left, and then we'd actually go out and knock on doors and do those things. And logistically, we would go out in twos. You don't want to walk up to a door with 3, 4, 5 people, obviously. Um, and Missouri has a lot more guns than Canada, so we gotta be careful. Yeah, but that's one thing we never had to worry about for the most part up there.
So
But
Wentzville,
yeah,
you probably do like Saturday mid-morning, is that?
yeah, we're gonna do Saturday mid-morning. We haven't gone out yet because of the weather. So, but I think a really important piece in all of this, Sam, is also prayer. And so we've been prayer walking in Wentzville now for 7 months, 6, 7 months. And our goal is to have prayer walked every single street in this community before we ever launch in the fall. And also when we prayer walk, if we encounter people, we'll pray with them, we'll share the gospel with them, we'll do those things. But really, that prayer walk, man, we're busting up hardened soil. We're asking the Spirit to go ahead of us. We're asking the Spirit to cultivate hearts and
Mhm.
prepare hearts. And I'm all about that. I'm all about Sunday mornings, man. I'm all about small groups. I'm about all of it. I think all of it's beneficial. I think that you'll meet some guys that are like they want to like they want to discount preaching or Sunday morning gatherings, and they're like, well, that's not that important or whatever. But hey, man, I could tell you stories of when we're out knocking on doors, the Spirit's not preparing somebody's heart quite yet for salvation. But we give them a card. That's another thing. Always have information about your church. Always have information about your church.
Do you say, knock on the door, hey, I'm Matt with Waypoint Church,
Yeah,
can you lead out with your?
absolutely. Absolutely. Man, I am not this may ruffle feathers. I'm not trying to. I'm not a community activist. I'm not a politician. I'm a gospel preacher. I'm a church planner. I think what we do is we go into communities, and at the heart of planting churches is evangelism. It's about reaching lost people. It's about tilling soil, right? And so what we talk about all the time is Sin Network. Engage the city. This is what we're doing. Engage the city. Engage the city. Make disciples. Plant churches. And so when you come into a community and you don't know a lot of people, you don't know many people, you're engaging that community. You could do that through other avenues as well, right? Volunteering, service, all those kinds of things. But at the heart of it, in my opinion, should be evangelism. We start church because we want to see people saved. We want to see people redeemed. Yeah.
Mhm. Awesome.
Yeah, man.
Man, that's a lot of helpful stuff. Um, Thinking about this, maybe one thing that may be unique in a small community could happen anywhere,
Right.
more likely to happen in a small community
Yeah.
is you your group says we're going to do this. We're going to go out and we're going to take a survey. We're going to ask for prayer requests. We've prayed ahead of time. We've kind of thought about our pathways to presenting the gospel. So we're all ready. We're
Yeah.
all prepped up. And we go knocking on doors. And again, it may be surveys, it may be prayer requests. And you've got Jim and Jane, and they go to that first door and they knock on it. And this is Saul and Nancy. And we went to high school with them. we've got kids in the same grade, so we know each other, but we
Yeah.
don't really like, we may even be friends on Facebook, but we're
Yeah.
not really in each other's lives.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so, but boom, here I am. I
Right.
know you. I've never talked with you about this in a in a natural context before, and now here I am at your doorstep. And maybe
Yeah.
there's like a, oh crap, this is someone I know. What do I do?
Yeah.
Have you
Yeah.
ever come into that? Or what counsel would you give that person? What would you tell them? Because in a small town, that's going to happen.
That's a great question, man. I would say, I would say we should have a 3 conversation rule as Christ followers. I don't think that anybody should have more than 3 conversations with a non-believer and that non-believer not know that you are a follower of Jesus. Um, Bible's really clear, right? We are salt and light, and we are salt and light through all kinds of ways, right? Saying like good deeds. We like to say good deeds lead to good news.
Mhm.
So it's not transaction. I'm not bringing food to this family who's struggling right now because I want them to come to my church, or even just because I want them to become a Christian. Although I do, I'm doing it because Jesus says to love people in His name. But I also believe that there are a lot of good not-for-profits out there doing those same things,
Mhm.
and they're not doing it in Jesus's name. And so that where the church is unique is that we have a king, and we are his subjects, and we are his ambassadors representing his kingdom. So I don't I always told our people in every church I had the privilege to serve at, like, there's no such thing as undercover Christianity, like hoping people will figure out that there's something different about me, although they should see something different. So that's the first thing I would always say. I think a 3 conversation rule is really good. So I think your illustration, Saul and Nancy, if they've known you for a while, hopefully they know, you're a Christian. And they would know you because you're the pastor in a small
Yeah.
community. And
Right.
so in that example, dude, this is the important part. I think sometimes, you know, like, oh, hello, Saul and Nancy, my name is, and people they get nervous, right? And it's a thing that Satan does that, and it's an easy thing to become nervous in that setting. And if it's somebody I know, absolutely, I'm not gonna. I say, "Hey, Saul, what's up? What's up, Saul? What's up, Nancy? Hey, man, what are you guys out here doing? Hey, we're just out here showing the love of Christ today, praying for our neighbors, and man, I didn't even know you lived here. Obviously, and how can we pray for you today? And just go with it, man, and just have a natural conversation with them.
Mm.
People, I think a word that people need to hear is people don't like to feel handled. People don't like to feel worked, like I'm working through this program or whatever. I'm just naturally trying to show the love of Christ to people, because he's done so much in my life. I can't help but not tell people about who he is and what he's done. And
Yeah.
I want them to experience that love. And it took me a long time, man, to figure this out. But in reality, it doesn't have nothing to do with me on the decision they make or what they do. The Spirit draws people to the Father. And I've gotten questions before. People will say, "Well, um, man, like I thought that was like an Arminius thing, like I thought only evangelists did." I said, "No, man. If we believe in the sovereignty of God, He can use me in a grocery store, just
Yeah.
like He can in the pulpit."
Yeah.
To cultivate and to build relationships. And man, I just think we got to release people. Ephesians 4 talks about apostles, prophets, evangelists, shepherds, teachers. We got evangelists in our church, man, and they're trying to figure out where they fit. And I think a lot of people feel like they can't be released to be on mission. They need permission to be on mission. We just need to help them. There's one thing that we're discovering is that there's a lot of people as we talk about these conversations, because I've been having a lot of these it resonates with people because I think uh, I'm not saying holistically as a church, but I feel like maybe we don't have these conversations enough anymore.
Mm.
Um, because I think Bible tells us Satan lies all day. That's what he does. He's an accuser. He lies. He's the father of lies, Jesus says. So he lies to us, and I think he convinces a lot of Christians that nobody out there wants to share, nobody wants to hear this. And if we really do believe it's the best news of all time, that's not true.
Yeah.
And so, and I will say this, you have to get comfortable with people saying no. You have to get comfortable with people saying, I'm not interested in that. You may knock on 100 doors before you get one person that wants prayer or is interested. But the question I always say to leaders is that one person worth it? And the answer, of course, is yes. That one person may be that person of peace that's going to know 10 more people that's going to bow the knee to Christ. And and so yeah, it helps us to be active and to live on mission, as we're making time to do it.
Yeah, awesome. That's super helpful, Matt. I really appreciate it. And
Good, man.
that's really challenged me and stimulated me to begin thinking more about, hey, are there more opportunities to be sharing Jesus in our community than I'm taking advantage of and our church is taking advantage of? So I
Yeah.
really appreciate you taking some time to share that with us today, brother.
Yeah, absolutely, man, for sure. I think it is interesting in rural communities. I grew up in rural communities, man, and in rural Oklahoma, and uh, churches would. I mean, you'd have to drive to houses, but you ain't walking, right? Because people's got a lot of land. Um, but there was a lot of churches that did this back in the day because in rural communities, a lot of people they have a semblance of church. They remember church. They
Yeah,
remember in Canada, people were second or three generations removed from the church, so they didn't have that remembrance or like Christmas and Easter didn't mean anything to them. They wouldn't come to those services just because it was post, but they will hear. They will hear. And I think our strategy in rural communities across Missouri, when we do this and we help churches to be on mission and share the gospel, I think it's a great opportunity to invite people back into the life of the church.
yeah,
Sometimes people just forget that we love them and that people are for them, and it's amazing, man. I've seen people weep at their door just because you ask how you can pray, and they're human secularists, man, and they have a daughter dying of cancer, and we're there to pray with them, and they start to cry. Now, if they don't believe in Christ, why are they crying?
yeah,
And it's because God has made everybody in His image, and deep within, they know they're made for more. And all we're doing is showing them the love of Christ and obeying. Just put a bow on all this, man. If the only reason why we do this is out of obedience, that's a good enough reason. Yeah.
yeah,
So, yes,
yeah.
sir.
Awesome. Thanks, brother.